Ki Choknam Lai Chanchu Baratu Dangni Chapsu Chi Daigi Jinso Jipe Sanam Ji Drola Penchir Songji Drobara Ju Songji Chedang Tsoki Choknam Lai Chanchu Baratu Dangni Chapsu Chi Daigi Jinso Jipe Sanam Ji Drola Penchir Songji Drobara Ju Songji Chedang Tsoki Choknam Lai Chanchu Baratu Dangni Chapsu Chi Daigi Jinso Jipe Sanam Ji Drola Penchir Songji Drobara Ju Simchen Thamche Dewa Tang Dewe Ju Tang Denpara Jurachik Dungaran Tang Dungaran Ji Ju Tang Tarawara Jurachik Dungaran Mimpe Dewa Tamba Tang Min Tarawara Jurachik Nyering Chadang Tang Taraway Tong Nyom Chenpo Lan Nebara Jurachik Paraden Zawe Lama Rinpoche Dagi Chiwara Panme Denjura Katrin Chempe Kone Chisungde Kusum Toki Ngudrub Tsaradu Sara Chumdende Chambe Yangla Chatse Luan Kongi Ludru Dimni Chandala Nitara Namda Rapsarawe Jingye Dungun Jishin Sichira Niki Tukara Legbanzin Konda Sibi Chunrar Marik Muntum Dungare Jisirwe Trozo Gunla Buchik Taratse Yenlag Drokchi Yantensung Trugdara Chenro Nyunmung Nilung Leki Chabdo Jersey Ching Marik Munsara Dungara Nyugu Jinye Chedzera Jinam Tene Dakshin Sachu Tarasun Yunden Nuzo Jerse Tuweku Chuta Chutang Chuni Gente Daglu Munsara Chambe Yangla Tu Tseden Cheki Chenra Veseregi Daglu Dimog Munpa Rapserane Kadang Dinju Shunglu Dogbai Lodru Bomben Hawa Tsaratu Solo.
Hello, everyone. We are currently focusing on the third theme that Khenpo Rinpoche taught in 2006, the theme of the vehicles. We saw that in this theme of the vehicles, there are two types of vehicles, worldly vehicles and vehicles that lead beyond the world. The worldly vehicles are two in number, the vehicle of gods and humans and the vehicle of Brahma. The vehicles that lead beyond the world are three in number. The Shravakayana, the vehicle of the Shravaka, the Pratyekya Buddhayana, and the Mahayana. We are currently focusing on the presentation of the first of these three vehicles. We saw yesterday that in 6 points, 6 perspectives, we covered the first perspective, which is the meaning of the word Shravaka. We're focusing now on the second perspective, which is the access to this path. It focuses on the four truths of the Noble One. Yesterday we covered the first truth of the Noble Ones, the truth of suffering, which is what it is necessary to know or recognize. Currently, we are focusing on the second truth, the truth of the origin of suffering, which it is necessary to abandon or give up. We saw that the truth of the origin of suffering is twofold. First, there are actions, or on the one hand, there are actions, and on the other hand, there are afflictive obscurations. Khenpo also clarified that the root of afflictive obscurations is the mental fabrication that is the view of an identity, of a self. We talked a little bit about this mental fabrication conception yesterday. We saw that Khenpo explained the difference between mind and the afflictive obscurations, which are mental events. And we're currently focusing on this explanation. Khenpo says that it's important to distinguish between mind. What is mind? A stream of animate knowledge or clear and knowing knowledge. And on the other hand, mental events, which are phenomena that have the specificity of grasping the particularities of an object. In contrast with mind, which knows the generality and overview of an object. So now we're looking at So we saw that there are 10 mental events that are always there, the great basis of mind. Then there are 11 virtuous mental events, 26 non-virtuous, and 4 variable. Yesterday, we left off at the end of the details. Khenpo went into detail for the 26 non-virtuous mental events. In other words, the afflictive obscurations. This is what interests us here because it is a part of the origin of suffering. He went into detail on the 6 root afflictive obscurations, and then he told us that on the basis of these root afflictive obscurations appear 20 related afflictive obscurations, which are derived from the root afflictive obscurations. We left off there. Khenpo didn't go into detail concerning the 20 related afflictive obscurations. They are, however, explained in great detail in the entry toward the state of Apandita for those who have studied that text or for those here who would like to study that text. Khenpo did continue by asking us a question. What is an afflictive obscurations? We are talking about the 6 root afflictive obscurations. We mentioned the 20 related afflictive obscurations. But what is an afflictive obscuration? He answered this question by saying, afflictive obscurations, in essence, are suffering. Their fruit, the result that they produce, is also suffering. Then he talked about the way that these afflictive obscurations are born or appear. The way that they appear is particular. This is why they're sometimes called by another name. They can also be called minuscule and deploying phenomena. Cha in Tibetan. The idea behind this name is that in the beginning, afflictive obscurations are very subtle. like mild aversion, mild anger, and then they deploy and they take on ever greater importance. Khenpo continued about anger. He took the example of anger. First, he said that there's the root, afflictive obscurations, the root of afflictive obscurations, the notion of a self or the belief in an identity. Then, so there's that, which is the basis, and then mind is accompanied by all different kinds of mental events, notably the first 10, which allow this mind to focus on an object of knowledge. If this object of knowledge is, for example, a person who has bothered us, who harmed us in the past, then what will arise in the mind will be aversion or anger. Then this tiny beginning, very minuscule, it will transform into something more obvious anger, more obvious aversion. And then it will grow in strength and it will wind up being so strong that it will lead us to act. And then we accumulate actions, accomplish actions. The example talks about anger or aversion, but this works the same way for every afflictive obscuration, for desire, attachment, etc. Due to this belief in an identity, the view of a self, the view of an identity, which is the basis, and afflictive obscurations that arise on this basis in the mind stream, then we accumulate actions. So, on the one hand, there are afflictive obscurations, and on the other hand, actions that occur based on them. These afflictive obscurations and actions that occur based on them are what we call the truth of the origin of suffering. On the basis of mental fabrication that is a view of a self, a view of an identity, we can also accumulate virtuous actions. In fact, actions that have this basis in the view of a self can be either virtuous or non-virtuous. In both cases, from the moment that these actions are based in the view of a self, belief in an identity, then these actions will perpetuate samsara. They'll perpetuate samsaric states, rebirth in samsara, whether they're virtuous or non-virtuous. This is why it is said that in order to go beyond samsara, it is necessary to give up afflictive obscurations and all actions based on afflictive obscurations. And of course, the notion of a self and the belief in an identity that is at the root of all that. Of course, notion of a self, belief in an identity, is an afflictive obscuration in and of itself. And we're going to redo the sentence. That's why it is said that when it is necessary to abandon the truth of origin, it is necessary to abandon afflictive obscurations and actions. Everything is included in those two. In order to progressively, and of course, this notion of a self, belief in an identity that is the root of all that, this is why we put into practice the different vehicles, whether it's the Shravakayana, or in the context of the Shravakayana right now, but also the So we concluded the truth of origin. Now we're going to look at the truth of cessation of suffering. As the Buddha explained the truth of the origin of all suffering, then what did he state? He stated the truth of cessation. He said, the truth of cessation is that which it is necessary to actualize. There is nothing else to actualize. The truth of cessation is what is to be actualized. There is nothing else to actualize. How do we actualize cessation? Khenpo explained that we actualize cessation on the basis of the yogas of Shine and Dhagpo. So first we apply ourselves to the practice of Shine, mental calm. That's one possible translation of Shine. Our mind of the desire realm is not calm at all. In order to attain this mental calm, to calm the mind, we remain concentrated on a focal point. This is what the method of mental calm consists in. We remain concentrated on a focal point. On the basis of this training in mental calm, then the practitioner will be able to continue with Dhagpo, higher vision. What is Dhagpo in the Shravakayana and Pratyeka traditions? In these two traditions, Dhagpo consists in dissipating the conception that is the notion of an identity. The conception of an identity. Sorry, the conception that is the notion of an identity, view of an identity. So to start, we will study and reflect on the Buddhist teachings. On this basis of study and reflection, we understand that this conception, this notion of a self, is nothing more than a conception. Conceptualization. Then we will familiarize ourselves again and again with this understanding, which will allow us to eliminate the cause for birth in the three realms. On the basis of study and reflection, we'll understand that this notion of a self is just a conceptualization, and then we familiarize ourselves again and again, which allows us to eliminate the cause for birth in the three realms. Due to this understanding of the non-existence of the self of the individual, the practitioner will be able to actualize cessation that is called the state of arhathood. In this way, they attain the fruit of the Shravakayana. Due to this understanding of the non-existence of the identity of the individual, the practitioner accomplishes the fruit of the Shravakayana. They actualize cessation, and in the Shravakayana, this is called the state of arhathood. Maybe not everyone is familiar with this term, arhat. It's a Sanskrit term, which was translated by Drachompa in Tibetan. Khenpo explained the different meanings of these syllables. The first term, cha, in Tibetan, means enemy. This term, cha, refers to the cause for rebirth in the three realms. This cause being, as we saw, actions and afflictive obscurations. The second term, chompa, means that these causes have been conquered. The arhat, chachompa, is one who has conquered or vanquished causes for rebirth in the three realms, which are actions and afflictive obscurations. In their mind, the causes for rebirth in the three realms have been vanquished. There are two types of arhats. Arhats with remains and arhats without remains. First, we'll look at an arhat with remains. An arhat with remains is an individual that has attained the state of arhathood but is still connected with a physical body. What's called remains here refers to the physical body, which is the product of actions and afflictive obscurations of the past afflictive obscurations of actions. This individual is an arhat. They have abandoned actions and afflictive obscurations, but up until their death, they remain connected to the body that they use to practice to attain the state of arhathood. They can't, there's nothing they can do about having these remains. Khenpo told us a story about two of the Buddhist disciples that illustrates this notion of arhat with remains. He told us the story of two eminent arhats with remains, as it were, who experienced certain difficulties connected with their bodies. Because, indeed, an arhat with remains who is still connected with their body is still subject to experiencing karma. They're still subject to the functioning of karma as a result. Because they have given up actions and afflictive obscurations, they will no longer create causes, but because they still have their bodies, they still experience the results of past actions. So here we have an example. The example of Modgayana, well, particularly Modgayana, but Shariputra was with him. They were two major disciples of Shakyamuni Buddha. Modgayana and Shariputra had the habit of going to hellish existences to help beings to liberate themselves from their suffering and unhappiness. One day they went there. They met an ancient Hindu master who was part of a tradition where the practice of sacrifice was quite common. Due to these sacrificial practices, which were not very virtuous, this master in question took rebirth in a hellish existence. He met Modgayana and Shariputra, and he asked them to tell his disciples, who continued to carry out sacrifices as he had taught them, to stop doing so, to stop making animal sacrifices, human sacrifices, that it was necessary to stop. And why did you want them to stop? Because every time these students, every time the students accomplished more sacrifices, this master in the hells experienced greater and greater suffering in the hells. And particularly the day of the anniversary of his death. At this time, his disciples carried out even more sacrifices to commemorate the death of their master. So he asked Modgayana and Shariputra to go see his disciples and tell them to stop. So they went to see these disciples. They shared what they had seen and heard, but the disciples did not believe them. They were relatively upset. They grabbed Modgayana and they beat him in anger. Apparently, they broke all of his bones. After that happened, Shariputra asked Modgayana why he didn't use his miraculous powers to get out of the situation. Modgayana is known for being the Buddha's disciple who had the greatest capacity for miraculous activity. And Shariputra asked him, so why didn't you use your powers to defend yourself? Modgayana replied that he didn't have a choice, that what happened, the experience that he lived, was the result of a past action, and that due to this past action that he had accomplished, at the time, he had completely forgotten his own powers. He was completely unaware of his own ability to carry out miracles. So while he was being beaten by the disciples of this Hindu master, he didn't even have the thought of escaping, even though he could have. He had the ability. This is an example, Khenpo tells us, that even an eminent arhat who is connected to their physical body can still be impacted affected by their past karma, past actions, and can still experience unpleasant sensations of suffering. Following this adventure, Mudgayana died. He died of the beatings and the wounds that he received. Then he rose into the sky. Apparently, what Khenpo told us is that when an arhat accomplishes wisdom, discernment, wisdom that realizes the non-existence of self, of an identity, when an arhat accomplishes this, it is not necessary thereafter to carry out cremation of their physical body. At the moment when an arhat with remains with a body becomes an arhat without remains, without a body, then apparently due to the fact that they have this wisdom, they incarnate this wisdom that knows the non-existence of an identity of the individual. And Khenpo says this is why an ordinary fire could not burn their body, unless the arhat themselves had given particular instructions before their death. This was apparently not the case here. And when this is not the case, such an arhat, when they pass away, they rise. And third, so a practitioner who finds themselves on the path of accumulation, primarily, what does it really mean to take refuge? And so what does it mean to be a practitioner who has truly taken refuge? Anyway, they also practice familiarization, but they especially concentrate on study and reflection. Why? Because, in fact, familiarization on the path of accumulation, practitioner is at the beginning of the path, so they primarily focus on study and reflection, and somewhat less on familiarization because they don't have enough study and reflection to be able to familiarize themselves with definitive knowledge acquired based on study and reflection. Familiarization is based on this definitive knowledge arising from study and reflection, meaning that it's based on a mind that is marked by conceptions. Due to study and reflection, we will acquire definitive knowledge, and this definitive knowledge is made up of conceptions, and therefore the familiarization is based on a mind marked by conceptions. What happens on the path of accumulation? If all goes well, the practitioner arrives at the path of junction. The path of junction is called this because at the end of this path, the practitioner directly sees the true phenomena. At the end of this path, the practitioner directly sees the truth of the natural state of phenomena, in other words, emptiness. And this is what allows them to continue on, access the path of seeing. On the path of junction, it's primarily a question of progress in terms of familiarization. practices of study and reflection have already been carried out on the path of accumulation. Khenpo clarified here that the path of junction is made up of 4 levels. Each of these 4 levels is divided into 3 sub-levels, which makes a total of 12 levels on the path of junction. How does the familiarization on the path of junction happen? The object of familiarization is the natural state of phenomena, dharmata in Sanskrit. But here on the path of junction, a yogi will just familiarize themselves with a semblance of dharmata because they have not yet actualized direct knowledge of the natural state of phenomena of dharmata. Even if their object of familiarization is dharmata, in fact, they familiarize themselves with a semblance of dharmata because they don't yet have a direct knowledge of it. In the Kagyu tradition, when these different levels are explained, there's a risk that is mentioned, which is the risk of confusing the experience of the natural state of phenomena with the realization of the natural state of phenomena. If a practitioner is not attentive to this on the path of junction, there are many obstacles that can arise. A meditator who practices authentically will acquire various qualities. And these qualities may lead them to believe that they have actualized the realization of the natural state of phenomena, when this is not actually the case. As they're familiarizing themselves only with a semblance of dharmata, they don't yet have direct knowledge of the natural state of phenomena, but there are experiences that occur, and they may think that this concerns realization of the true state, natural state of phenomena, which can bring a lot of obstacles. We're going to take a little silent break. continue with the third path, which is the path of seeing or path of vision. In the context of the Shravakayana, the context we're currently focusing on, the path of junction leads to its result, fruit, if all goes well, which is called the path of seeing. The path of seeing, in the context of the Shravakayana, the state of stream enterer. The state of stream enterer. In the great vehicle, the Mahayana, the result of the path of seeing is simply called the path of seeing. So these expressions are only used in the Shravakayana, stream enterer, etc. Stream enterer means that the practitioner's mind enters the stream that consists in directly seeing the natural state of phenomena. The practitioner's mind that enters the stream that consists of directly seeing dharmata, the natural state of phenomena. So the 5 paths are the same in the 3 vehicles that lead beyond the world. We're always talking about the same 5 paths in the Shravakayana, Pratyekabudayana, and Mahayana. However, their viewpoints, their established conclusions, are not exactly the same. As such, the 5 paths are not defined in exactly the same way in these 3 vehicles. This level of stream enterer is made up of 16 successive moments in the Shravakayana context. Let's wait till the end for questions. In the context of the Shravakayana, this path of seeing that corresponds with stream enterer, this corresponds with what is called 16 successive steps or moments. In the context of the Mahayana, the great vehicle, the path of seeing is not obtained according to a progression of instants. It is attained directly, all at once. In the great vehicle, the Mahayana, the path of seeing also corresponds with the first bhumi, the first bodhisattva level or ground. So coming back to the Shravakas, when the Shravakas attain the path of seeing, this level of stream enterer, at this moment, a practitioner directly sees the natural state of phenomena, dharmata. So, Khenpo told us, they will no longer commit the errors that can occur on the 2 previous paths, the path of accumulation and the path of junction. Then the practitioner reaches, it's not a place, but they reach the path of familiarization or training, often elsewhere translated by the path of meditation. On the path of familiarization, the principle is to familiarize ourselves with the direct vision of the natural state of phenomena, dharmata, again and again. The idea is to familiarize oneself with what was seen on the path of seeing. In the context of the Shravakayana, this path of familiarization involves two fruits, two results. We speak about the fruit of a once returner and the fruit of a non-returner. The fruit of a once returner, in brief, Khenpo told us, refers to the fact that for a practitioner who has obtained this fruit, there's still the possibility of returning to the desire realm. This is why they're called a once returner, because they may return one more time to the desire realm. Indeed, at this level of fruit, the practitioner has not yet abandoned all afflictive obscurations of the desire realm. The Shravaka practitioner who has attained the fruit of once returner still has in their mind afflictive obscurations. Afflictive obscurations said to be innate or co-emergent is a certain type of afflictive obscuration. Then there is the fruit of a non-returner who doesn't return where? To the desire realm, once again. This one, the non-returner, has abandoned all afflictive obscurations of the desire realm. That's why they no longer return to the desire realm. However, they still possess certain afflictive obscurations associated with the higher realms. In other words, the form realm and the formless realm. Khenpo gave us a little bit more context to help us understand these two fruits. He said to us that, for example, if during this lifetime, right now, I make effort on the path and I obtain the state of a once returner, I'll take rebirth in samsara in the desire realm, more specifically. However, I will be able to continue my path toward liberation. Indeed, a practitioner who has attained the state of a once returner won't return as an ordinary being who has to start the path over completely from the beginning. They're reborn in samsara in the desire realm, but they'll be able to continue their path from where they left off. A practitioner who in this lifetime has attained the state of a non-returner, at the moment of death, they will not, after death, in fact, they won't retake birth in the desire realm because they have obtained the state of a non-returner in the desire realm, but they may take rebirth in the form realm, for example, And it is there in the form realm that they will continue on their path towards the fruit of Arhat, the final fruit, as it were. Khenpo clarified at this moment that, of course, this concerns a brief explanation. There's a phone ringing. Following this musical break, we have arrived at the fifth path. The path of no more learning. This path of no more learning, which is the fifth path, corresponds with the ultimate fruit, ultimate goal of the Shravakayana, in other words, the state of Arhathood. So concerning the 6 points, we've covered the first 2. We covered the etymology as well as the second, which is the access to this path. This brings us to the third point, which is the disciplines associated with the Shravakayana. In the entry to the state of a Pandita, there is a definition of discipline given. It says, discipline is a commitment to virtue that remains until the end of a life. Discipline is a commitment to virtue that remains until the end of a life. What Khenpo explained about this is the following. He said, discipline is what prevents body and speech from carrying out harmful actions. This discipline is always virtuous because we commit to refraining from misdeeds of body and speech. A practitioner of the Shravakayana knows that samsara is nothing but suffering. On the basis of this disenchantment towards samsara, this practitioner has no idea other than that of attaining liberation. On this basis, there are 2 types of discipline that the Shravakayana practitioner can take. There are secular or lay disciplines, Genyan disciplines. And then there are monastic disciplines of individuals who have given up having a home, as it were. The difference between these 2 types of disciplines, lay disciplines and monastic disciplines, the difference between them is related to the number of vows one must observe. The lay disciplines involve fewer precepts than the monastic. Both forms of discipline need to be taken on the basis of a mind that is disenchanted with samsara. What is the essence of these disciplines? The essence of these disciplines is not directly or indirectly harming beings. Not directly or indirectly harming others. This concludes the third point, the disciplines associated with the Shravakayana. This brings us to the fourth point, the view associated with this path to the view actualized in the path of the Shravakayana. The view actualized in the Shravakayana is that the identity of an individual does not exist. It is necessary to know that the view that considers an identity to be existing involves two aspects. The first aspect is the innate notion of an identity. And the second aspect is the superimposed aspect of an identity. We'll look at these two aspects in detail. These two aspects of the view that considers an identity to be extant. The first aspect, the innate notion of an identity. Khenpo explained that this innate notion of an identity is a latent imprint arising from familiarization with a mistake that mind makes since beginningless time. I'll say it again. The innate notion of an identity is a latent imprint arising from familiarization with a mistake telephone is talking. Must have pressed on something. Okay, let's go back from the beginning without telephone interruptions. The innate notion of an identity is a latent imprint arising from familiarization with a mistake that mind makes since beginningless time. I could maybe say it a different way if you like. Mind makes a mistake since beginningless time, and we've familiarized ourselves, mind has familiarized itself with this mistake, and there is a latent imprint that is left due to this familiarization, and this is the innate notion of an identity. From birth, we have this thought, I, without anyone teaching it to us. There's a latent imprint that is there that arises from birth. Nobody needs to teach us. Nobody needs to teach us to say or think I, me. We have familiarized ourselves with this mistake since beginningless time, and there is a latent imprint that has been created in our mind. It's always there from our birth. It'll be there as well. we'll think I without anyone teaching us. Then there is the superimposed notion of an identity, or completely constructed notion of an identity. This superimposed notion of an identity is adding things to the innate notion of a self. Different knowledge, for example, points of view arising from a school of thought. In certain religions, there's an idea of a creator God, and other schools of thought, they speak about Atman. These types of points of view, which we find in different religions, different schools of thought, present the view of an identity as truly existing in different ways. These are worldly views that focus on the true existence of an identity. These are ideas that are acquired due to the circumstances we find ourselves in. I'm adding this. If we grow up in a country where there's a certain tradition that teaches about the existence of a creator God, then we acquire this type of idea. This then is added to the innate notion of an identity. Khenpo said that it's very easy to believe traditions like this because their point of view is close to our natural point of view, which is that of believing that we truly exist. We have this innate notion of an identity, and these traditions that present a superimposed idea of an identity are very easy to believe because it corresponds with our natural point of view. However, in the Travagayana, it is advised not to believe these views. It's not about rejecting them either, necessarily. The idea is rather to try to analyze using our own discernment and to see if there truly is a creator God, an Atman, etc. We commit to a process of analysis. We engage in a process of analysis. And then, Khenpo told us, at the end, it becomes relatively obvious that our mental consciousness will not find a creator God or an Atman or this type of object. If we reflect, if we analyze, if we really look into this idea and follow it to the end, we should naturally reach the conclusion that such phenomena are not established, are not establishable. So Khenpo began this analysis for us. He said, the innate notion, innate belief in an identity considers the 5 aggregates as an identity. Me, I, am my 5 aggregates. The analysis will begin by examining, by trying to find this identity within the 5 aggregates. Khenpo told us that we could start with the aggregate of form, the first aggregate, the aggregate of our physical body, for example. We analyze our body and we observe that our body is not a unit. It is a phenomenon that is composite. It is made up of parts. These parts are themselves made up of parts. What kinds of made up of what? If we take this reflection to its conclusion, particles of matter. These particles of matter can even be subdivided into smaller particles, etc., etc. We can apply this same reasoning to the 4 other aggregates. The aggregate of sensations, the aggregate of distinctions, the aggregate of conditioning phenomena, and the aggregate of consciousnesses. By carrying out this analysis, by taking it all the way to its conclusion, we will normally arrive at the conclusion that there is no identity, no I or me that exists. There are many things, but there's no I. The principle of the view of an identity is that it is a mental construction. This belief in an identity is a mental construction, a conception that is mistaken, and that will believe in the existence of something that we cannot find. So this is an analysis concerning the view of an identity in a relatively coarse fashion. This focuses on the 5 aggregates and the aspect that looks at these 5 aggregates and says, this is me. We can also consider the way that this view of an identity considers me in a more subtle way. That considers the mind stream, the stream of successive moments of knowledge. And by carrying out this analysis, we realize that, in fact, mind is simply a stream of moments of knowledge that are animate and knowing. These are the characteristics of mind. Mind is animate and knowing. Khenpo told us that the animate aspect, sometimes translated as clear, is seen by mistake as being an identity. The view of an identity, the belief in an identity, focuses in a subtle way, not on the 5 aggregates in a coarse way, but on the mind stream in a subtle way. And this mind stream that has the characteristics of being animate or clear and knowing, then this aspect of being animate will be grasped by mistake as being self or an identity, being me. The point of view, or in the 4th point here, that explains the view to be actualized in the Shravakayana. The view that is maintained in the Shravakayana is that there is no existing identity in an individual, that an individual does not exist in and of themselves. This point of view allows for actualizing the fruit of this path, in other words, the state of arhathood. This is also what the fifth point tells us. The fifth point is the fruit actualized by this path. The fruit actualized by this path is the state of arhathood of the Shravaka, quite simply. So now we're going to look at the final point, which is fairly short, and we'll conclude here for today. The final point of the presentation of the Shravakayana is the sixth, which presents diverse categories that we can find within this path. There are two types of categorization. There's a first one in terms of school of thought or established conclusion, and a second one that is more connected with the conduct, the Vinaya. The first categorization includes two schools of thought, two types of established conclusions, which are the Vaibhashika schools of thought and the Sautrantika school of thought. These two schools of thought are two categories of schools of thought that can be found in this vehicle, in the Shravakayana. The second categorization is more in terms of conduct, Vinaya. According to the Vinaya, which is the basket of the Buddhist teachings that brings together the various teachings that concern refreshing conduct and disciplines, various disciplines, vows. According to the Vinaya, we can count 18 traditions within the Shravakayana. These 18 traditions of the Shravakayana appeared due to slightly different interpretations of the Vinaya. They're not major interpretations. Khenpo told us there's no major differences between these 18 traditions or schools, aside from little differences connected to the color of monastic robes, the shape of various icons, symbols. These 18 traditions can be broken down into 4 traditions. Khenpo didn't give us the names, so we won't give you any names. He said that among these 18 or 4 traditions, there are 2 that remain today. One survived in Tibet. This is the Mula Sarvastivada tradition. Mula Sarvastivada. And the second one survived in South Asian countries like Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar. And this is the Staviravada tradition. Staviravada. The other traditions did not survive. This concludes the 6th point of the explanation of the Shravakayana, and thus concludes the explanation of the first vehicle that leads beyond the world, the Shravakayana. Tomorrow we'll start the second, There are 5 minutes if you have questions. Thank you for this explanation. I learned a lot of things, but I don't have a lot of clarity about understanding what I've heard. I often thought about relative truth and ultimate truth. Can we talk about in the Shavakayana, is there an ultimate vision or not? Because there's remains, it's not full enlightenment. Are these terms more connected with the Mahayana and the Vajrayana? There is an ultimate view in the Shravakayana and the Pratyekabudayana. This is not, there's not only a relative view. I I'm not going to go into more. And then Julie adds, well, in fact, there is an ultimate view, but they're not the same. They don't all agree on what the ultimate view is. Okay. You mentioned aversion. Is it an afflictive obscuration? I would have put it in opposition with desire attachment. Do we categorize it? I invite you to go over to return to the presentation of the aggregates, notably the fourth aggregate, the aggregate of conditioning phenomena, in which you will see that anger is among the 6 root afflictive obscurations. The term aversion, which is often used, tell me if I'm making things up, but which is often used as a synonym for anger. We particularly find it in the context when we're talking about the 3 poisons, desire, attachment, aversion, and ignorance. Does it occur in the entry to the path of the Panditas? Yes, we find it in the term absence of aversion, which is one of the 11 virtuous mental events. In the context of the entry to the state of a Pandita, in the chapter on the aggregates, aversion and anger are synonyms. Okay, thank you. That's much clearer. If we look at the definition of absence of aversion and the definition of anger, they're basically opposites. So we can see that aversion and anger are synonyms. Concerning connection between the state of arhathood and the first bhumi in the Mahayana, can we connect them in some way? Can we correlate them? Is there a difference? That's my question. What was said here is that what we call the path of seeing in the context of the Shrivakayana, this corresponds with the state of stream enterer, and what we call the path of seeing in the context of the Mahayana, this is what we call the first bhumi. So, your question is concerning, is there a parallel to be made between the state of arhathood in the Sravakayana? That's the 5th path. Whereas in the Mahayana, the first bhumi, which is the 3rd path. So you're wondering if there's a parallel to make between the 5th path in the Sravakayana, state of arhathood, with the 3rd path in the Mahayana, which is the first bhumi. I would say that up till now, there's not enough information to really answer this question. But in the explanations of the Mahayana, there's a whole explanation that may answer your question. Hello? Hello? Thank you very much for this very rigorous presentation. I'd like to go back to yesterday, because I didn't have a chance to ask my question yesterday, concerning liberty and impermanence, something that confused me a little. Maybe I wrote this down wrong. I wanted to correct it maybe. I understood that you said that we have no liberty due to impermanence. And then I crossed it out and I said, we have no liberty on impermanence. And then thinking about what Jigme Rinpoche said this morning, that the path, oh, I couldn't hear him. The path leads to liberty. The path arises from liberty. I'm sorry, I don't know what he said. In fact, the word liberty wasn't used yesterday. Yes, okay, sorry. Yes, it was. No independence concerning impermanence. We have no liberty due to impermanence. In fact, we have no liberty, no independence in regards to impermanence. There's nothing that we can do about that. We can't decide to be eternal, to not be sick. That's what it means. It's certain that we will die one day. Ooh, it's 4:33. Let's conclude and dedicate.
Sunamdi tamchi sikpani tomne nyebe janam pamchene chega nachi palap chokpa ye simpe tsole rowa terware sho Chitaran chempa ton kuntu sampu deyang deshinde Dita kungi chisu talopshim Kewa ditra tamche rabdu ngoy sanje kusum nyepe Chunye minjur tenbe jinlab dong Gendun miche tunbe jinlab ge Chitara ngowa menam chopare shu